Kentucky yesterday 4-2 to take the opener of that series. Looking for their first road series win. They could get that with a win tonight when Garrett Stalling starts with the Volunteers. Visit Jeep.com today for legendary deals during the Jeep Freedom Days sales event. I'm Matt Pauley with the Sports Flash on 1420 WEMB Sports Radio.
Tri-City Sports Now. I'm Marky Billson. Mentioned that Unicoi County was coming off a 1-0 loss to Wolcott, Connecticut. And you see, we've been carrying the Blue Devils on here since 1950-something. The station began in 56. And actually, I can remember when the Blue Devils were carried on WXIS. That was before WEMB was 24 hours. Anyway, still a day to dusk back in those days. The thing about that game, though, is I want to give some credit out to Caleb Metcalf, who was a hard luck 1-0 loser, because Metcalf only allowed 4 hits. And, after Peyton Whitson, the Blue Devils have really struggled on the bump this year. But if Metcalf could be that number 2 starter or be the guy that can give them the innings, then that could change a lot of things for Unicoi County come playoff time. Like I said, they have been they've been in just desperate need of pitching depth. They may have been able, after Metcalf, and of course a lot relates on the strength of the Wolcott, Connecticut team, which I will tell you about a little bit later on in this. I'll try to get this on this feed here. But before we do that, there's been a lot of talk, I mentioned earlier, about robot umpires in baseball, which on its surface, I would say I don't necessarily have a problem with. Call me sounding like, I don't know, the brain center at Whipple's, for all you Twilight Zone fans out there. But, look, if you got, theoretically at least, the robot umpire, the call would always be right? I guess unless it was like, this is the fully automated mechanism. Everything is perfect. Nothing can go wrong. Nothing can go wrong. Nothing can go wrong. Nothing, that old joke and all that. All right. You have that fear, I suppose. But still, you've got a circumstance where, there was a study done that when they did the robot umpire, 34,000 balls and strikes were called inappropriately. The guy I used to write for, Rob Kunster, used to write for baseball. He used to run Baseball Digest, okay? And I did some stories for him. Really enjoyed writing for Baseball Digest when I did. He's got a story out, and it is kind of the old-fashioned argument for, we need the human umpires. And again, I don't want to sound like the brain center at Whipple's. If you've never seen that episode of The Twilight Zone, arguably it was the last great episode of The Twilight Zone, okay? And at least the first run. They brought it back, I know, but I'm talking classic run. Yes, I know, I need to watch the contemporary Twilight Zone so I can talk about that as well as shows that were done in black and white. However, what you had in that was his name was Whipple. Okay, I remember that was the brain center at Whipple. It was the Whipple Company, and the son had bought and made the plant totally automated, and thereby he had fired thousands and thousands and thousands of employees. And as a result, the labor costs were all down, and as he said, hey, I don't have to pay for, sick leave. I don't have to pay for vacation time. My productivity is better because my my machine will work 24/7. My human being will only work 8 hours, and it's got to be you might take a coffee break or something. But the idea was, boy, how cold and heartless are you? Some ways I think about that with robot umpires. Then again, you say, well, you wouldn't have Angel Hernandez complaining about, goodness knows what, saying he doesn't get a promotion because he's Latino, when he's rated consistently one of the worst umpires in baseball by those who do those things. And it reminded me of, from back when, Pam Postima, who was a minor league umpire, who was known for ejecting anyone who would actually look at her with a cross, just look at her funny, and ultimately did not go to the major leagues because she was not a good enough umpire. She sued, she lost, as memory serves. And she was not discriminated against. I've checked out with the she sued, she lost. I know she raised a stink about it, but ultimately nothing came of it, is what I should be saying. It was not, oh my goodness, Postima was wrong. It was like, no, Postima needs some help here on some of her calls, this sort of thing. Anyway, and he needs to quit ejecting everybody at the drop of a hat. Rob Kunster writes, though, about the human element, and, he talks a little bit about this. He speaks of Doug Harvey, the Hall of Fame umpire, who had a big strike zone, by the way. When Doug Harvey worked in the major leagues, his strike zone, it was known, was the biggest. And that's actually one of the reasons why he was my favorite umpire, because then the games would actually, go faster. Now they want to speed up the games, and they talk about reducing the strike zone. I'm telling you, Rob Manfred does not have a clue. One of the reasons he doesn't have a clue is he doesn't go right to Yankee Stadium and say, play Kate Smith, God Bless America. All right, this is a very fringe element saying that this is offensive. Anyway, Doug Harvey, once said, when I'm right, no one remembers. When I'm wrong, no one forgets. But as Kunster says, umpires are, when you think about this, the vast, vast, vast majority of the time they get it right. I'm not big on bashing umpires. I often tell you about, Fabulous Sports Babe, horrible sports talk show host, with one exception. Whenever somebody from Podunk would call up and want to complain that their team lost because of bad calls, boom, score more points. Score more points, and cut them off. Maybe that didn't work if it was a soccer or a hockey game where you score goals, or a baseball game where you score runs, but you get the idea. Anyway, where we're going with this is there is a idea that the human element of the home plate umpire should never change. Now, admittedly, you'd go from strike zone to strike zone and all this. And Kunster says challenging an umpire's decision in baseball and all sports is part of the new era of the game. In other words, it's not so much like the old-fashioned, argument, Earl Weaver, getting into it, or Billy Martin kicking dirt on an umpire, just face-to-face like you'd see. And, that was always kind of an appealing part of the ball game. It may have appealed to our worst elements, but, it was an appeal. Let's face it. Yeah, that sort of thing. Maybe you were the Bundys by the windowsill eating popcorn, if you remember that old episode of MWC. But still, yeah, it was an appeal. Well, you don't have that so much anymore with replay. There's still a few ejections. Angel Hernandez seems to like ejecting people. But it is part of the new era of the game now to challenge the call. It's a new way to change it. And although it takes a little bit of time, and it still wouldn't have helped out, say, the Tigers' perfect game back in 2011, because you can only overturn so many calls, or, so many things can be challenged. The idea is, even with all those replays, a lot of times, it's extremely difficult to figure it out. I've always kind of been, if it is that close, maybe there should be a human element. Maybe, just maybe, instead of a half step, Cardinals should have thrown out, oh boy, I'm really giving you a dated reference here, but George Orta in 85 by a whole step and not a half step. Maybe the throw should have been a little bit harder. We can discuss that. Still was a bad call. I remember watching it on TV and saying, oh, he's out. Oh, they called him safe? Really? You get that. But the idea here, maybe if you didn't want to be called out, you should have beaten the throw by a little bit more. or vice versa. Anyhow, I mentioned this one thing that isn't talked about, and I've talked about it a lot when it's with robot umpires. Guys, just think about this. We began talking about the show, and we'll talk to Knockahoma Nation's Josh Brown, 1:30 today, about baseball and the human element of the game. But here's the thing. You put in the robot umpire in the major leagues, it's only a matter of time then before people are going to want to have the robot umpire in all leagues. You're going to have a computer specialist for Little League games. Now, I don't know. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's bad. But it seems like that's an awful lot of equipment for baseball entities that's, let's face it, yeah, I mean, it's a lot easier to pay an umpire $25 a game or something than it is to get such a unit, isn't it? Can you imagine what, Little League, you pay, for the uniform, and there's a fee, so they can have a waiver for insurance and all this sort of stuff. But how much would the fees go up further if there was a robot umpire? And let's face it, if it's in the major leagues, it's got to trickle down to all aspects of baseball sooner or later. Or else you start thinking, boy, we are really using something obsolete by the fact that we are, having these human umpires. One of the major leagues, they have robot umpires getting all the calls right. By the way, who would ever want to, in such an environment, call a Little League game? Because, let's face it, when you call, say, a Little League game, even a high school game, it seems, the call, somebody thinks you got it wrong. It does not matter if the throw to first base beat out the runner by 30 feet. No, the runner who was beaten out by 30 feet by the throw, their parents think the call was wrong. Who would then, in such an environment, we really need, you're obsolete there, Blue, get out of there. Who's going to take up that job if that's the environment? That's what would come with the robot umpire. Maybe Major League Baseball, if they ever wanted to do that, shouldn't look by putting it in the major leagues first. Maybe they ought to look at investing in their game at the grassroots level and trying to find out on the experiment if it would work on the lowest level of, say, Little League games, Pony League games, that sort of thing. Just a thought. Tri-City Sports Now reminder, Josh Brown, Knockahoma Nation. I got some guy talk to give you when we come back. Tri-Cities Sports Now coming back after these messages.